1 week post South by Southwest, Adam and Kinley, you guys did a incredible workshop in South by. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what you did?
Yeah. Well, we had a 2 hour long workshop that we ran that was focused on gamification, really
Yeah,
kind of overcoming some of the misconceptions around it. And we sorted it into about an hour of interactive learning with some trivia and real life use cases, and then an hour that was an actual working session where people could come up with a gamification story. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about that, Adam. Like, what were some of the main points that you really delivered for the group?
Well, one of the main points that we tried to communicate is just how motivations have a big part in of why you would choose certain mechanics. So, motivations for us was step two, and we don't even get into mechanics until step three, and that's where a lot of clients and people jump to when they start thinking about gamification. So, we really tried to pound home a goal is one of our step one, step two, motivations, and then we don't get into mechanics until step three.
Yeah. I loved the worksheet you had people fill out. I mean, talk about the workshop part of it, Kinley. Like, what was the process you put people through?
yeah, so we went through and introduced them to kind of the four main parts. Like Adam said, we have goals, we have motivations, mechanics, and then finally tension. And so we actually built out an exercise that people would fill out around those four topics.
Yeah.
They were given some prompts in terms of, some common motivations to pick from, etc. And then at the end, they actually had a gamification job story, almost like a Mad Lib that they created. So it's very
Yeah.
hands-on.
All right, we're here with Pranchu and James. Wanted you both to get an opportunity to recap a little bit of the presentation that you did at South by Southwest. Pranchu, why don't you start? So, like, give us a pitch of what you all talked about.
Yeah. So, hey Barry, good to be with you today. Yeah, we James and I both co-led a presentation called Beyond Beautiful: The Design Delta, and really the problem we were trying to solve was the reality is like design has always had a credibility issue in the
Yeah,
boardroom, right? Not because executives disagree that it matters, but the problem is measuring that impact, right? And nobody has a defensible way to show that math. So oftentimes design gets treated as an expense versus an investment. So we wanted to fix that. So we created this framework, the Design Delta, which gives a way for finance and other executive stakeholders to actually engage with it. And
yeah.
so it actually does math.
I
So
love it. I love it. Like, James, step us through like sort of the big pieces of the framework. Like, how do you use it to predict the kind of the value of great design, and what are the levers you can pull?
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks, Barry. So we try to make it really simple, not because it needs to be simple, because there's a lot of complexity and nuance, but because we need to be able to account for like just the huge amount of variance and possibility that creative and design is capable of.
Yeah,
So there are three components that are part of it: the problem value, design influence, and execution quality. And we score each of those 1 to 5. We then multiply them together, and we don't add them to get a composite score of like 125 that connects design decisions to measurable outcomes. The multiplication is the key insight. If you score 0 in any dimension, like problem value, the whole thing collapses. Like if you have
yeah,
great design, but the problem doesn't matter, what are you doing it for, right?
yeah,
And then we built a dollar bridge on top of it, right? It's because we want that change to equate to financials. So what's the financial opportunity at stake, and
yeah.
specifically show how design is part of that.
I loved it, and I love that you almost kind of stepped people through the actual algorithm and how they could use it. I love that it kind of creates a universal tool. Like, you could look at a bunch of different design opportunities and run it through the algorithm, and it kind of gives you almost like a numerical prediction on the value of each. Can help people predict what's going to happen. Talk a little bit about some of the questions, because I always find that fascinating at South by Southwest. Like, Pranchu, like, what did you think of some of the questions people had when you shared your algorithm with the team?
yeah, it's funny you ask. I mean, we did build in this live audience exercise that we showed live, a dynamic tool that to get folks really like actually feeling the methodology we were sharing with them. And honestly, like the Q&A took longer than the actual presentation, which was surprising and awesome at the same time.
Yeah,
And to your point, Barry, they weren't like soft, easy questions. Like people were trying to stress test the model, trying to poke and prod as to why we structured things the way we did.
yeah,
I thought it was like a really the ultimate compliment, right? The folks are really actively engaging with the content and like really like, why did you think about it this way? Or what happens if we did it this way? And so I think it told us that people are actually like connecting with this and they're hungry for something like this that bridges those two worlds, design and finance. And they wanted to see the map.
So, Alex, you were up on stage with Suf Syed from Microsoft Research at South by Southwest. What did you two talk about?
We talked about invisible interfaces, liquid brands, and we talked a lot about AI and how it's going to change the design world, and how a lot of people aren't ready for the change coming. And Suf's very much at the bleeding edge of this.
Yeah.
So part of the conversation was related to where where a lot of people are now versus where he is.
Yeah.
And there's a gap there, as a gulf, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that was the
Like
kind
he's
of
out there on the frontier, as you sort of talk about. He talks a lot about, working right in that substrate layer, right in the LLMs. He's not a fan of some of the big platforms that are out there right now. He thinks that they actually are going to potentially go away. He loves the idea of people being ICs, or sort of like citizen designers, citizen developers. Like, what do you think he's right on, and what do you think that he might not be right on?
Well, I think in terms of the feasibility of the technology, he's pretty right on everything. I think it's just the way in which the tech will be embraced and used within organizations, right? And there's always going to be a human constraint to that. So,
Yeah.
tech perspective, from a purist perspective, I'm all on board with what he was saying. But the reality of the way in which a business operates, the fact that we are still predominantly people driven with the company, means I think there's a lot of barriers there to overcome. I wouldn't even call them barriers, I'd call them blockers, actually.
Yeah.
So from a purist lens, I'm all on board with what he's saying, but I think that the change in business it is currently too big to get to that kind of like almost called that nirvana of tech and human working together in a very symbiotic way. So that's where I stand in it. I think half of me is like, yes, the other half of me is on the practical side of me is like, well, humans still drive a lot of business decisioning and work. It's still a long way from where he's at.
So, Alison, what did you think of South by this year?
Well, it was exciting participating because we are now surrounded by a lot of noise on social media and AI launches everywhere. And I think that this is a place where you can listen from different people who are using these, and then you can compare with your experience, see where we are heading, and then start shaping a different perspective and also bring to the team. So I think that was really powerful, and I feel that this year was less about the hype over AI and much more about the impacts and consequences and how should we follow, right? So I think that was a really exciting edition this year.
James, talk a little bit about South by big picture. Like, was this your first time ever at the festival?
It was my first time, and I had dreamt of going for years. It was awesome.
Yeah. What did you think of some of the content there? What are some of your big takeaways?
Well, the overall programming, the main theme was humans, right?
Yeah.
Especially with AI and quick adoption, right? Every track from tech to AI to design, creator economy, it was humans were the common thread. And I think that like a third of the session submissions that we saw in the agenda were AI related. I think the overall consensus was that like humans are being replaced, is that our roles are being redefined. And that maps directly to what we presented, right?
Yeah.
Design Delta doesn't replace a designer's judgment. It really gives their judgment a language that business decision makers can act on.
Yeah. So what are some things that you're going to do in Dentsu Labs differently after your experience from South by?
That's a great question. I think so. I enjoy the startup area. I spent a lot of time in there talking to startups, how we can partner, and that's where I get a lot of my inspiration from, and a lot of how we can think about new products and propositions going forward. So we're actually launching we call an R&D Horizon, which is a research focus for us, and it's going to be on the future of interface. It's going to run for the next 6 months, and we have our teams prototyping solutions around the future of interface, and that a lot of that's going to come from South by in terms of the direction, the topics of conversation. So the plan is in 4 to 5 months' time, with a range of different prototypes, we bring our clients into the lab. They play. We kind of talk about what we did, and we publish a research report alongside that. So
Yeah.
for me, I went to South by thinking about what is the topic we should investigate next, and interface was the clear winner based on the narrative.
Yeah.
And I've taken that back and then tasked the team with investigating that over the next kind of 4 to 5 months.
The one thing that's really clear is that everybody is changing and changing fast and trying to figure it out. I mean, that was really the subject of the panel that I led there at South by Southwest. It was called Lies My Creative Director Told Me, Myths of the Agency World. It was wonderful because we had the most senior creative leads from 4 really large companies: Critical Mass, Interbrand, Wong Duty, Infosys, and then I was up there representing Merkle and Dentsu. And we're all talking about how our creative departments are changing, how our ways of working are changing, how we are coaching people to really sort of adopt new tools. We talked a lot about this notion of a citizen designer or a citizen developer, essentially this notion that with these tools, what used to take 2 or 3 or 4 different people, you can actually do yourself. You can do yourself in a lot of rapid sort of development, and how you can, like what you're talking about, Alison, you can basically start with a product, and then you can just refine, as opposed to what used to be a very long on-ramp onto that initial product. And that's a very different way of working, because really most of the time is around refining and optimizing, as opposed to spending so much time on that initial launch. But it was comforting to hear, I think, 4 very different perspectives on the future, but a shared sense of change and what psychologically I think that means for creative people, right? I mean, what did you hear about that? There's a lot of worry, I think, for creative people about what this means.
Because I believe that people will not be able to stay so focused on execution and craft anymore. And I believe that for designers now, more than ever, it was always important, but more than ever, they need to understand deeply their client business, right? Their audience. And then by understanding this, they need to understand this to bring value to the conversation, right? It's not just about to craft something. But at the same time, I think that this might be challenging for some people, but I think that also one thing that was that I heard a lot was about taste, right? Which is something that the AI is not there yet. So developing taste, developing the human intuition, emotion, this is still relevant. So I believe that at the same time brings some challenging for people, but I think that it's a really nice place to develop taste and intuition, right?
Give us some of your impressions of the Innovation Festival overall. Like, what are some of the things you saw that were cool, and what are some like trends that you thought were really interesting for our business?
Yeah, I mean, AI, of course, was everywhere. It was really interesting that I think it seemed like a lot of the topics that people were broaching were kind of trying to add science almost to some of the art that I think sometimes we take for granted a bit. We went to several different talks that were kind of about, infusing neuroscience into the marketing process. A lot of the AI talks were very specific about a specific part of AI or studies that had been done. At least for me, that's kind of 2 of the themes that I saw.
Yeah. Adam, what about you? What did you see that stood out?
Yeah, I mean, just being my first time at the event, what stood out to me is just, I was just thinking collaboration. I was expecting a lot of sales pitching. I expected to be kind of pitching myself, and it really felt like, the rooms were flat. It was people just having ideas, collaborating, and that felt refreshing, and it really felt you're a part of a community there of leaders, and as well as like the future generation. So I walked away really inspired from that.